Despite his name, this is one villain you don't have to babysit. He is the perfect baby. Hey guys, MasakoX here. Dragon Ball GT. And the way I see it, as I get older and I start to see some of the decisions that were made into, from a business and logical point of view, I feel bad for the show. There were good intentions here to try and make something that was true to the spirit of the first series back in the mid-80s. They had the go-ahead from Toriyama as well as some basic pointers and guidelines before he then would step into semi-retirement after working for so long. The outlook wasn't all that bad. There was one problem though. They gave up too soon. It's recently come about that producers for the show realized about 3 episodes into their series, around about when they actually went into space to begin this journey, this mystical adventure in space to search for the Black Star Dragon Balls, that this formula wasn't going to work. Okay. In a way, the choice to bring Goku back into the mix as a young'un, artificially, wasn't the best call. It would have been better for Goku's power to be brought back to the level that he was in age 750, and that would mean he'd be of no use until these new set of balls were brought back to Earth and they could actually fix the problem. Maybe then we could have had Goten put down the phone for a hot second and actually go do something. Maybe even give us a sweet taste of grown-up Gotenks. I'm sure that would have been cool to see. Maybe even teach Pan how to go Super Saiyan while we're at it. There, doesn't that sound much better already? With their original roadmap for GT in pretty much tatters, the team decided to fall back into the formula that was very, very well tested and had a lot of fans behind it, and that formula surrounded a big bad that would transform once, twice, 3 times, whatever over time, and that our heroes would have to face as he progressed up the power ranks, our gang maybe getting a transformation of their own, or 2, for good measure. Enter Dr. Lychee and his Tuffle creation, with the initially weak characteristic of being in a jar. We are talking about GT's best villain by quite a bit, or at least the best thought out villain. That is Bebi. If you are new to this channel, we have talked about key baddies within the show's history before, and how they were great, and how they weren't so great. We actually managed to even reinvent some of them into something that could work within the main lore of the show, instead of just being confined to the movies in some sort of kind of weird state of, are they canon or aren't they? You don't have to use the word with us. You know, the characters who were destined to only have an hour at most to make an impact with the characters, and most of the time it would just end with Goku winning with probably the Genki Dama. It's been a while since we did an installment of this series, which talks about the possibilities of how we might reintroduce certain movie or filler baddies, and heroes sometimes in some cases, such as Pikkon and Tapion, to the modern era of Dragon Ball. Now you might be immediately saying that Bebi is already in the series, why does he need reinventing? Well, GT quite frankly needs reinventing in of itself, in its entirety, but we've already made quite a few videos talking about this topic already, so we shall hold our figurative horses on that front for now. This particular evildoer hasn't just gone into the shadows, he's actually been referenced twice in recent years. It's clear that he does still resonate within the fandom to some extent, at least well enough to warrant it being wheeled back into the limelight for a game appearance every now and again, or maybe in some trading cards. Whether another facsimile or alternative could take his place hasn't really been explored. We haven't really seen a worthy modern version of Bebi that would carry on its surprisingly solid legacy. And no, the toothpaste siblings do not count. Go back to your card commercials, Kamioran! I'm sorry about that, sorry, just don't like those two. Where were we? Instead of talking about these ultimately disappointing variations of Tuffle robotics, Bebi remains true. Arguably, the best executed villain concept in GT. Was it perfect? No. His outing within the series still suffered from many issues that GT already had and would continue to have, but Bebi is still the only GT villain that is at least acknowledged and deemed worthy of our attention. He was able to actually enact his plan, to begin with, and avenge the Tuffles from all the trouble and strife that the Saiyans had once caused hundreds of years ago. It's pretty funny that a similar story/outcome occurred quite recently, eh, Zamasu? Oh, come on man, stop crying, somebody thought of it first, deal with it! The things that made Bebi pretty unique, especially at the time, was his mind control ability, which was the biggest usage of this type of power in Dragon Ball's history. This wasn't just your typical hypnosis thing, sort of like what we saw with Babidi. This was through something else that could happen to anyone in a way. They were corrupted via a cut or a scratch, contaminated then by Bebi's influence. It was actually quite eye-opening in a way, and something relatively grounded in reality. It was like a parasite. Another thing to point out here also was his relationship in regards to the Tuffles, a grim reminder to one of the Saiyans' biggest acts of terror, but food for thought in terms of how the relationship between these two races really looked like. Bebi's ability to steal bodies was actually a pretty understandable motivation. Sure, he did infect loads of innocent civilians, but he mainly focused his attention on Saiyans living there on Earth, as well as their hybrid offspring. It was pretty concentrated, although served in a pretty convoluted way, which made him into a really interesting opponent. This wasn't just aimed at Goku specifically and Goku only. If you were a Saiyan or associated with them, you were at the top of Bebi's naughty list. You know what? When you stop to think about it, this plot point was sort of brought back in Dragon Ball Super, and it was also not very well executed. You know which mini-arc I'm talking about? Super tried to pay tribute to this, sort of, with Copy Vegeta, a mini-arc which, well, I suppose the nicest thing we could say about it is that it was cool to hear Brian Drummond again in the dub. It eased the pain for us seeing Gotenks being the most obnoxious, certainly. At least we never saw him again in the show after that. Our writing team decided to try again, with a much more direct spin on Bebi's moveset, with Carmine and Orin, or Carmi-Orin, and oh dear. Whilst the initial idea of having sibling Tuffles or Tufflebots was pretty neat, their personalities were just so bland, and whilst their Crash Break move was kind of cool, Megumin did it better. Aside from the obvious Super Dragon Ball Heroes problems, making them into Universe 6 Tuffle parasites sort of takes away Bebi's more tragic and understandable motivation, and giving Orin opportunity to snatch Vegeta's body is seen not as a tribute, but as something very repetitive. Oh great, Vegeta is being controlled again. I can't recall any other fictional character which has been possessed by another entity as much as Vegeta has. So, from what you might be able to gather, trying to pay tribute to GT's most competent villain isn't exactly the easiest thing to pull off successfully. How do you solve a problem like Bebi? How would we introduce him into the modern Dragon Ball Super sphere that isn't what we've seen in recent years and also remains faithful to his legacy? Well, the initial step towards making the perfect Bebi is quite easy. Get the ball rolling, as it were. First of all, we would get rid of Dr. Myuu. Okay, well, why? Besides GT's fascination of making all the villains mad scientists, he's simply unnecessary. He's quite frankly a more mediocre, bluer copy of Dr. Gero. And granted, we don't have to get rid of him entirely. He could appear in a flashback as part of what's set about Bebi's creation and the computer, then carrying it on, fostering the M2 planet, as well as luring Goku and company to a trap. In what we actually got, things got pretty confusing with Dr. Myuu. Instead, we can use someone like Dr. Lychee. Oh, no, not that one. Oh, sorry, wrong image here. This one, yeah. With this version of Lychee, or some kind of other tribute character created for this purpose of fostering Bebi, we would have him be one of the very few survivors on the Tuffle side after the Saiyans launched their final push against their counterparts. Perhaps we could make things even more interesting. Instead of being a pure Tuffle survivor, he was one of the outcasts of both parties. He could be a Saiyan Tuffle hybrid, forced to work for King Vegeta in order to find some kind of place in society, a reason to exist, you know, instead of being doomed to ostracization, obscurity, and derision. As a result, he would understandably be resentful towards his Saiyan benefactors. If you want to make things even simpler, he could be the only escapee from Planet Plant, kept around as some kind of trinket, a trophy for King Vegeta to look at and congratulate himself for his kind strength and mercy towards kind of peoples. This man who had lost everything would be very eager to enact his own attack of the Saiyans, if you would. Now, of course, we have to outright state that after he learns that planet Vegeta had been destroyed, his outlook changes considerably. Sure, he'd be disappointed that he wasn't the one to wipe out the Saiyans, but ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. The biggest stain on his life, the reason why he had so much hatred, had just been booped out of existence by Frieza. And sure, yes, he was an evil, self-obsessed and ugly tyrant in his own right, but Frieza, he cared not about him. Consequently, he no longer feels the need for revenge. On one hand, he is sad that his own homeworld is now just a cluster of asteroids, but on the other hand, well, someone hit his greatest enemies for him. So, what's this man going to do now? Is he going to SeaWorld? Well, no. His time is quite limited. Since all this catharsis took its sweet time to come to fruition, he is now already an old person at the time of the eradication of the Saiyans. No pun intended. He's possibly the last Tuffle in the galaxy. No possibility of repopulating his people now, or at least in the conventional way. Fortunately for him though, he was able to sneak out some genetic samples from his brethren with him, just in case. It would be a long road and the Tuffles wouldn't be as pure as they were, but it's something. And hey, there would now be at least more Tuffle-like beings than Saiyans in this reality now, so that's a thing. And thusly, he dedicates what remains of his life to repopulate his species with the power of cloning. With time against him though, and him being a mad scientist, he would of course try to attempt to prolong his life, upgrade himself wherever and however he could. So we would then fast forward some 43 years into the future. This fellow would now almost be unrecognizable from when we first set out on his quest. He would be mostly cybernetic, trialing out his own experiments that he would then implement into his cloning efforts. This is also when our scientist learns about Super Saiyan Gods, the Red Power, that thing that Frieza was blathering on about all those years ago. Seems like they were real after all. We believe that the Tournament of Power or the Moro arc will then help greatly when it comes to expanding Goku's and Vegeta's reputation throughout Universe 7. Pretty much everybody knows their names now. At first, our Lychee would be furious, and understandably so. After all that he'd been through, finding out that some Saiyans, including the Prince, had survived the destruction of the Saiyan homeworld would be extremely nettling. However, after discovering that Saiyans and humans were compatible, well, he sees something promising. As for now, his machine mutants or parasites are far from perfect, but if those Earthlings are compatible with Saiyans, that may mean that they could be compatible with Tuffles. After all, Tuffles were humanoids, so it shouldn't be all that complicated, right? They surely have similar bits. His parasites in this iteration of the narrative would be more of a hive mind rather than an individual personality. This in order to give some sort of unique spin when compared to the previous works, with Bebi being the core mind behind the computer. The most complete of them as such. Bebi would be basically unstoppable, being able to transfer from one vessel to another. Once Bebi was able to enact his master's revenge, Goku and Vegeta would probably be training at Beerus's place, which is the norm these days. But after they return, they would discover that something had happened to the people of Earth, as well as their nearest and dearest. Their friends and loved ones would be acting rather strangely. It turns out that they've been taken over by some mysterious force, and they're not sure what it is. They would be taunted more and more, dubbed the ones responsible for the end of the Tuffles, which would cause Vegeta to refresh Goku's memory on that subject. They would have to fight through powered-up versions of their friends and family, trying not to hurt them too much, which would then create a pretty unique peril, and then they would get to Lychee's ship. Now, here is where things get a little different from Dragon Ball's tried and tested methods. Instead of fighting and going into Lychee's with the intent to hit him really hard, they would try to reason with the Doctor, saying that they do not condone the Saiyan actions of the past. They had moved on from that and had changed for the better. On top of all of that, there was no reason to make the people of Earth suffer. If he were to carry on this madness, Lychee would be no better than the Saiyans who took his home, and with a little bit of luck, Earth can be home to the Tuffles as well. He could do all of this what he wanted peacefully, not by mind-controlling the populace. This would make the Doctor hesitate. They made a fair argument. The points which the Saiyans made, mostly Vegeta, who would be himself guilt-stricken at this point, would start to get through to him. But before he would be able to stop his plan from moving to the next phase, Bebi would sense this happening and take his master out, deeming him too weak and a hindrance for the plan. He had faltered, and thusly was compromised by the Saiyan scum. Bebi, in terms of his character, would be pretty similar to his GT counterpart, but we would like to take away that whole possessing Vegeta thing from the equation. This has, as we said before, happened way too often. Instead, his new body would be created from the samples that he gathered from Earth before Goku and Vegeta had arrived. After all, him controlling Saiyan hybrids would have been remarkably useful intel. Goku might point out similarities to Vegeta, but it would probably be played out mostly for gags. This is Dragon Ball after all. At the end of the day though, Goku and Vegeta would be vastly overpowered, and in order to gloat, Bebi would use his army of loyal pawns to finish them off. Despite this though, Vegeta and Goku will be able to get through to the monster's programming, as well as the Control Dragon team members, and as a result, they would then free themselves from Bebi's control. With the combined efforts of everyone, Bebi would be thwarted. The remaining machine mutants, clone Tuffles as well as parasites, would be then rendered defenseless and capitulate without their master brain guiding them. Instead of destroying them, Vegeta would gather the Earth Dragon Balls and give them a new planet, a new home, thus ending the cycle of hatred between the Saiyans and the Tuffles. Also, Vegeta would be just glad for them to shut up about how the Saiyans of old had been wronged by them. Without the influences of their creator or Bebi, the new Tuffle race would be slowly rebuilt in their own image. But what do you guys think about it, really? Do you have other ideas onto how we could use Bebi? Do you even like Bebi? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going. And I shall see you in the next video. Catch you later!